back just to ourselves. And I've been talking about classic Jewish concepts, Jewish ideas, and I'm going to try to wrap up sometime after the holidays or during the holidays. But we've been going from the people, the Torah, to God, to between human beings, to the idea of Kedusha, how we live this life, how we approach life. And then the question of what brings Jews together? How do we get Jews together physically? Together, right? And we have, right? And we ask, what is it that gets us together with each other, with God? And so, in the beginning, when we were still scattered tribes, there was the family under the tent. The head of the family would slaughter a lamb or the goat. Blood, Noah would tell us this, the blood would be returned to the earth. And that would be the simplest service, simplest worship, and then everybody would eat together, right? So the idea of the family, this ancient gathering of the family as a sacred event, still exists in Jewish practice, but without the poor lamb in the middle. The lamb is done in the grocery store instead for us. So at the Shabbat table, we have 2 loaves of challah. Why 2 loaves of challah? Reminds us of the 2 loaves that were presented in the Beit Mikdash, in the temple of old. Right? We don't have the temple. We have the table. The table of the family is the mizbeach. It becomes the altar. Hence the 2 loaves. We have the kiddush with wine. Well, nesach yain, pouring out wine, was an ancient way of celebrating and giving a gift to God. So we drink it, right? That's why Jews won't drink wine that's been made or handled by a non-Jew, because it may have been sent out, poured out to the wrong God, right? But there's that sense. So we've transferred into the table, into the family, the idea of the korban and the altar. We've done that. So one important area that has kept us together is the idea of the family, and everybody knows Jews are very family-oriented. In many ways, Jews who are not formally connected with the Jewish community, per se, have strong families and get together with the families, right? Dr. Norman, is there Friday night within the Iranian community where they don't all get together? Very big, right? Shabbat, same thing, everybody, that's the big thing. But it's still, we know that itself is not enough. We need other ways of getting Jews together, because not everybody's family. How do we get all the non-relatives together, right? So we won't go into too much, the idea of offerings, goes down Noah, Abraham, and so on. But it's really with the Exodus that we have actual instructions for some kind of ceremony that brings us back to God. And right after the 10 Commandments, the first thing we have is setting up an altar, mizbech adama, an earthen altar, and not making other gods, make an altar of earth. So this is where now we're going to have something bringing the people together, in this case, still around the idea of giving of something. I'm sharing food with God, just like at the table, I'm sharing food with the family, God's with us. So there's the essence of worship in the world of the first temple Judaism. Right? I give something of mine. God has given me bounty, and I give back a portion symbolically. Okay, so what else does God get? He gets the reach nichoch. He gets the sense, the smell. It doesn't need a smell. It doesn't need perfume, but it's that sense, the feeling that we are sharing. We're trying to share, and it's a great metaphor for the sense of a union with God. Catholics still do it, to a sense, more than we do anymore, through the communion with the wafer and the wine, because they take Jesus as the symbol, replacing the korban, and the wafer, the body, and the wine, the blood, symbolic of this ancient korban. Right? That's how they've transformed it, we may say. Some Protestants also, not all the time. So what else goes into a worship? What else goes into worship? What about a bracha, saying a blessing? It's interesting, the very first person who says a blessing is not a Jew, right? Not a Hebrew. It is Melchizedek. When Abraham comes to him after the war with the 5 kings, and they come to give thanks that the war is over, and he says to Abraham, Baruch Avram la'elayon. Blessed are you, Abraham, to the highest God. Right? He's the one who's teaching us a bracha, how to make a bracha, right? The word Baruch. The first true prayer that we have is Jacob prays for his wife, but we don't have the words. that she has a child and so on. The first case where we have a prayer with words is the story of Miriam. Miriam gets afflicted with leprosy, right? And Moses says, Elna Rafana La. Very short, very short. The rabbis teach from this. You really want to get your point across, 5 words, don't overdo it. Of course, Jews are not, you can't tell Jews to stop talking. And so our prayer books are very long, but the essential prayer should be very short to the point. So it's because it got so many things to pray for. What can I tell you? There's a story about a man who comes to the Rebbe. He says, Rebbe, I have a million worries. I have a million worries. What do you mean? The Rebbe says, what do you have a million worries? He says, I have to marry off 5 daughters. I need 5 weddings. My wife is sick. I need to get money for the doctor. And the house, the landlord has to pay. I have to get money. So the Rebbe sits down and says, okay, let's put $1 sign on all this. Adds it all up. He says, oh, okay, $5,000. So look at this. You don't have a million worries. You only have one worry. How to get $5,000. We solved the rest of the million. Yeah, all right. Short to the point. So do we have anywhere in the Torah, though, where there's an obligation? Interesting. Is there an obligation to pray? We have one phrase. Well, we have the Shema, but it's not a prayer in the sense that I'm talking to God. It's instructions to me how to think about God. Right? Shema Yisrael, listen, this is what I'm supposed to think. That's what I'm supposed to do. So that's an affirmation, not so much a prayer in the sense of a petition or a praise. So do we have any obligation? Otherwise, well, there's one sentence in Dvarim which says, Ve'achalta v'sabata, after you eat and you eat your full, u've'rachta v'nelecha. Praise to God. That's the Birkat HaMazon, but we also don't have a text for it, right? So we don't have any system, no system in place. So maybe because of the first temple period, there's no need for a system. But then, with the temple, the beautiful pageantry of the temple and so on, there's no need for anything else, really. But then comes the 586, and the Babylonians destroy the temple. And the bulk of the population, certainly at least the elite, the upper elites, are exiled to Mesopotamia. So now without a temple, the north had a temple also of its own. That was lost 150 years before. We believe a lot of the people of the north escaped to the south and made Judea their replacement. But now it's gone too. So what do you do without the temple? What can you do on a foreign land, on an alien land? You don't feel at home and you don't feel in place. How can we sing the Lord's song in a strange land? That's from Psalms, right? Shir Ma'alot. It's the on the road Babel, Sham Yeshavnu Sham Bachinu. By the waters of Babylon, we sat and we cried. So what is happening now? So we see that people gather in small groups at the feet of religious teachers like Yechezkel, Ezekiel. It seems right. He would gather around him. Charismatic figures would gather around them, the remnants of the community, and build them up and guide them. And so he has a phrase, L'chein amar ko amar Hashem, hi echaktim bagoyim. It's true, I have scattered you and sent you far among the nations, and I've scattered you among those countries. I shall be God himself, Mikdash Ma'at, a small sanctuary in those lands where they have come. So Mikdash Ma'at, in this sense, God's presence, the Shekhinah is with us, but also Mikdash Ma'at, present in that gathering of the few Jews that gathered together to discuss the words of the prophets and what they remember that they brought back with them out of exile, from the captivity. So we do suspect that maybe there's such gatherings that went on even while the first temple stood. There's the phenomenon of B'nai Nevi'im, the students of the prophets. They're people who gather around the prophets and study from them, and they gather and they serve them, they help them. They gather around figures like Elijah. And then, as I said, they had local sanctuaries. It took time to reject those local sanctuaries, but those had also served them. Maybe there could be other places. Right? The hints in the Psalms of gatherings. But gradually there's a recognition that the temple sacrifice alone, and this is already happening in the first temple, is not sufficient. So we have Yeshayahu fasting is sackcloth, do not work. It must come together with loosing the bonds of the oppressed, for example. Or Hosea, God says, I wanted mercy and not offerings. Right? Things like that. Or the hypocrisy of Shochet Shor Makeh Ish, one who offers an ox while he's killing another human being, right? There has to be a morality together with the offering as an important part. So we have the beginnings, as I say, already in this period. Yirmiyahu describes the destruction of the Beit Ha'am, house of the people, alongside the temple. First mentioning of this, Beit Ha'am, some kind of structure where the people also gathered, parallel to what was going on in the temple. Yeshayahu talks about rebuilding the temple, associates it with the concept of tefillah. He ties it in and says, I bring you to my holy mountain. I put you in my house of prayer. Your offerings on my altar and Beiti Yikare Beit Tefillah Lekol Ha'amim. We now are the house of prayer for all the world. Right? So now we have this conflation that we have the sacrifice, but also the primacy of the offerings of the heart, the mind and the heart. So this is now gelling in the Second Temple period, into the Second Temple period, coming back from Babylonia. The idea that now, parallel to what's going to go on in the temple, you have to have the people come together to pray and study. So as the temple is rebuilt the second time, we now have the idea of mishmarot and amadot, watches and stands, where priests would have representatives in Jerusalem on a regular basis, putting up the offerings. And each week, a community, different community, would gather while their representative is in Jerusalem, putting up the daily offering, and they would gather in parallel. So we have a parallel service now going on at the same time that the service is going on in Jerusalem, right? So that's the beginnings of our Beit Knesset. And we know that by the time of the Christianity, or beginnings of Christianity, by the times of the destruction of the Second Temple, synagogues with some formal services were already established, even while the temple stood, right? They had this also synagogues in Jerusalem. As the temple still stood, there were synagogues, gatherings of what we call today in Yiddish, Landsmannschaft. You had synagogues by land of origin. This was the Babylonian synagogue. This was the Egyptian synagogue. The temple is standing, but they had their own synagogues. And also by business professions, which still goes on until today into modern times. Antioch, Alexandria, Egypt, was reported to have the biggest synagogue ever. They said that it had more Jews than the number of Jews that left Egypt. Pretty big. They said it was so big that the cantor davened, they had to wave a big flag so the guys in the back row would know when to say Amen. All right, that's it. Antioch, also Rome, Christian strictures, the Kfar Nahum, this reminds of a synagogue. Right? At the same time, there's something else is happening. There's also a distancing from the temple, even while the temple is standing and highly appreciated. There is a distancing from the priests in charge. Right? We had the great Shimon HaTzadik, so somebody who was great and noble that even Alexander, that is said, bowed in worship to him. But by the time of Antiochus and the rebellion, it was the priests who had betrayed the thought of the temple. And the Maccabees had to take over, and the Maccabees took over the temple as priests and then also as kings, and then they too fell in disrepute to the point where the rabbis were angry at the Kohanim, and they would attack the Kohanim, and they say, woe to those of the high priests of the house of Baitos, woe to be due to their clubs, that the Kohanim had taken over the business of the temple as a business and beaten people out for their money, right? Very, very antagonistic. So things are happening where gradually, when the temple is destroyed in the year 70, it could be replaced. So it would be the synagogue would now be the temple, and the people and the rabbis, not the priests, are instead of the Kohanim. So what do you mean the word synagogue? Synagogue is a Greek word, sin coming together, and then gogos leading people together, gathering place for the people. That's from the Greek. It is an approximation for the Hebrew word Beit Knesset. Knesset meaning Knessia, coming in together, a collection, a collection of who? A house of assembly, the house of the people gathering together. So the people needed their place to get together. The Greeks would then translate the term Knesset into the word ecclesia. All right, so it's then it becomes Latin, ecclesia, which means, as a Catholic church, is the ecclesia, ecclesiastic church, all right? Ecclesia, gathering together. The English term is church. In Arabic, the concept carries over into Islam, right? The masjid, the mosque, is the place where you bow down. Lisgod in Hebrew, bow down. In Arabic, the cognate word, so it becomes masjid, the place where you bow down, because there, the bowing is the way of physically showing worship to God. So, but notice in all of these, the places, both in the church, especially more with the Protestant church maybe, but also with the mosque, is not just there to pray, but also for assembly, general communal needs. Happens in Christianity, happens in Islam. Also, these are extensions of Jewish ideas. Long before there was a Motel 6, for example, there was the synagogue, the Beit Knesset. So there wasn't just the way you got there to pray, but the synagogues, the ancient synagogues would have small rooms on the side. It was a safe place for travelers. They could stay overnight and they could get something to eat. And so one of the theories is that why do we do the Kiddush on Friday night? Since Kiddush has to be done before dinner, there's no dinner for us in the synagogue. It is because the travelers were there in the synagogue. The Chazan, the Baal Tefillah, did the Kiddush for them to be able to eat after the service. Then everybody else would do it at home. Okay, what other terms do we have? So Motel 6, not exactly, right? It's the place people, Jews could stay and be together. Beit Midrash, the house of study, from the word Midrash or to the word Doresh, inquiry. So that's why do we go to, that's why when we talk in Yiddish, we say we go to shul. Shul in Yiddish, from the German Schule, which means a school. And therefore, if you look at, classic synagogue seats, they would have the rows, and then here in the front, they would have the stender. And we have for Joe, because you put your books here. You're going to study your Gemara, you're going to study your Midrash, you're going to study some Tanya of the Chabad, and you would have, footrest. Footrest, that's in the Catholic Church. Catholic Church. Went to a Catholic church once. It was a cathedral for a rehearsal for a concert, and we're sitting there. Ofer is with me. He says, "Oh, it's very nice of them to put footrest there." I said, "It's not footrest. It's for kneeling." That's what it's there. Okay. So, but they also would have a little container. So you put your talis, fill in, you can have it there, and whatever you were studying, you put in there. Right? It's a house of study. Sitting in pews like we did here, well, that's borrowing from our Christian neighbors. Originally there were no chairs, right? We sat on cushions, and still done and was done up till modern times in some Middle Eastern synagogues. By the way, the equivalent in Islam, madrasa, midrasha, a school. So close, languages are so close. I don't know why we get in trouble with each other. There's so many things that we should be sharing. So what do you do in shul? Also, nice company, right? There was a letter to the editor in the Forwards. Forwards was the Yiddish newspaper of note that helped Jewish immigrants become Americans. It was in Yiddish and talked about all the problems of modern times. So someone asks, there's a letters to the editor, Bintel brief, says, somebody asks, why do you go to shul? So Avram says, I go to shul to talk to God. And Yitzhak says, because Yitzhak's a skeptic, he doesn't believe anything. He says, why do you go to shul? I go to shul to talk to Avram. Right? Why do we need to, right? So this shows we get together. It's like with humans heal in company. Humans don't heal well alone. That's why we have the Bikur Cholim, kind of visiting when someone is ill. Pick up 1/60th of the illness. Food also, right? You can't have a shul without a kiddush or an onik Shabbos. And in the ancient temple, the temple was eating in the presence of God, so the kiddush afterwards, or the onik Shabbos also sharing something. What's a companion, right? Companion Latin with bread, sharing. When we share bread, we have friendship, communication, right? Very important. The synagogue becomes a place for the Su'udat mitzvah. a banquet for the purpose of fulfilling or having fulfilled the mitzvah. Right? We eat. Okay, and I said also intellectual stimulation. We go to the shul to study, to learn, right? They weren't designed like churches originally. They weren't designed to be listening to the preacher up front. They were centered around the bima, right? As I said. Okay, of course, also then Beit Tfilah, right? House of prayer. And again, because prayer is best in a community. You can always pray alone. Rabbi's emphasized that nothing beats minyan, because then you're engaged in Kiddush Hashem, sanctifying God's name in public. And we're also told, Al tifrosh min hatzibur. Do not cut yourself off from the community. The community may be really terrible people, maybe miserable people, maybe rotten people. Don't abandon the community, because they may turn around and you're going to be left alone. Right? Always together. Kiddush Hashem, prayer in public together, no matter who the people are. All levels and all personalities, and good and bad and in between. The rabbis give a classic example. The word public, tzibur, is combined or composed of the letters tzadik, bet, and resh. Tzadik for tzadikim, of course, you have righteous people in the synagogue. Who else goes to the synagogue? You have benoniim, average people go to the synagogue. Rashaim, wicked people. If you don't try to bring in the worst, the righteous alone is no good. The middle is no good. You have to have everybody in. Hence, the synagogue had to be open no matter what. Right? Okay. So now I said I wanted to give us a little bit of not eye candy, but visual treat instead of singing. So just as an interesting aside, this week, there's always something interesting being uncovered in Israel. This week they announced findings of ivory inlay pieces from the time of the Second Temple. They're probably shortly after the time of King Solomon. These pieces were then. They asked, how is it possible in Jerusalem? Ivory at that time was more expensive than gold, because the processing of ivory was done up in Syria, Assyria, in those areas, parts of the north. The elephant, the tusks would be brought in, and they'd be shipped all the way there. That's where they had the experts. So they would prepare the ivory pieces for inlay, and then ship them back to wherever they ordered from in Jerusalem. So it indicated, they said that there was enough economic power in ancient Jerusalem at that time for the people, for the well-to-do, to be able to afford something like this. And so you look at this, and there's geometric patterns, abstract geometric patterns, and interestingly enough, no animal figures, no human figures. Notice one of the things that we found is sort of evidence by the lack of evidence. You find in Canaanite settlements little statues and so on, but in the Israelite settlements, you don't find a lot of little statues. You would expect, they're influenced by the neighbors. And that's one of the things. The other thing they find is that they're, again, going back just a few years ago, at Mount Shechem, we have maybe the oldest temple, Mount Shechem, which is Grizim, the Samaritans. It's on the side of a mountain facing the east, and it is going back to the time of Joshua or somewhere around that time, which would be parallel to the time the archaeologists say, you know what, we noticed that there are unique settlements in the hill country, different from what's on the flatlands around. And the way they know it is because they had 4-room houses, and it was only Israelites had 4-room houses. The Canaanites had different kinds of house structures, and they find them all around. So, and they're around this period that we assume from the Bible, the Jews are coming into, the Israelites are coming into the land of Israel. So, just going to click on these one at a time and show you this. That's it. There we go. Let's see if I can get it up. Coming up. Oh, wrong button. There we go. Put this up. So Hebrew writing discovered at Joshua's altar would be very ancient, an amulet going way back, but this is the altar. There we go. There, I put it in front for you. That would be what they assume is the oldest altar that they could find, somewhere at where Joshua had established in Shechem the first base. and the way it has the ramp, it has certain things that are peculiar to the structure of Israelite altars, not Canaanite altars. So that's the first. How about that? Yeah. Yeah, for the animals, right. Yeah. But there's a particular build to it. Notice the emptiest holocaust probably was earth, and then there's stones put around it, and they're rough stones. So what else do we have? Wrong one. Okay. And then as I said, we have ancient synagogues. Ancient synagogues. So we're here. The land of Israel is full of mosaics, also not just Israel, but around it. So, for example, this is supposedly, I'll go back to this one. We are told that this is an Egyptian at the Red Sea being swallowed by the fish after his chariot has been covered and flooded. All right? This is a decoration in the synagogue. The next one, animals. So we did use images in the ancient synagogues. This one, I think, somewhere around the year 400 and so on. Hukok. That's it. So, and we have, of course, Beth Alpha has some beautiful mosaic with the Greek zodiac in it. Right? It was good stuff. We took it. If it was good, we took it. All right, another ancient synagogue. And if you go to Spain, we put up some very beautiful synagogues in Spain. Of course, after the Inquisition, there's the Spanish that's pity to destroy something so beautiful. This is in Toledo. Right, look at the very fine architecture work, the intricate geometric patterns. It's very, very common, of course, in Islamic art. Now it's called Santa Maria de la Blanca. It was in Toledo, right? It still is there. Now, because I said, basically, the basic simple synagogues didn't have chairs, sat on the low benches or couches. The chairs European, and well, actually, it's very ancient. Pharaoh had chairs, and so we know from that. But most people didn't. Chair was for the very wealthy. Common people sat, like in Yemen, on the floor, couch on the floor, and then notice a little stand so they could put the books. Here's the ark for the Torah scrolls. Very, very simple one in Sana, the capital of Yemen. My father-in-law presided over a very beautiful synagogue, Yemenite synagogue. It was a tourist attraction. And unfortunately, the building had fallen into disrepair and it had to be rebuilt. So there's no synagogue there anymore. Sana, well, it's the beginning of photography. So this has to be a century or more, much more than a century ago. No, Sana. Sana is Yemen. This one is Sana in Yemen. Yeah. Well, here's a beautiful one in Poland. It's been restored. Major project to restore its beauty. And look at this. I'm going to enlarge that. I don't remember which city it's in, but look at the intricate artwork. They spent money and effort to restore the color to what it was. Oh, I don't know if any. Joe, have you ever seen it? But you notice here the zodiac signs, a very popular image. The elephant, I guess, thanks to the story of the Maccabees and fighting the elephants, and other tales. I see a giant fish, so maybe that's Jonah and the whale, and maybe that's Leviathan in the imagery there. A beautiful place. Okay, and now there is a website that you can go to. It's called synagogues-360.anumuseum.org. ANU Museum is what used to be the Museum of the Diaspora in Tel Aviv, and it became the ANU, which means us, our museum, and they took over this website, did a great job. So you can go and see any of the synagogues that are still in existence around the world. So it's 360 Synagogue ANU Museum. So this is my father's synagogue. I'm going to put this where he officiated. And I'm going to enlarge the screen here. And what's very nice is you can see, you can go around. This is a 360 view. of the synagogue. And then you can move it around. The women's gallery here. Remember that this was the liberal synagogue before the Holocaust. Women sat in the balcony in the synagogues, in the liberal synagogues. Mixed seating is an American invention. And there we have the main sanctuary. The original building, it had an ark. It's just become an Orthodox synagogue as the community has changed. So there's no need for an organ. So I guess they took it apart. But it was the second largest organ in all of Germany. Okay. Let's go here. Shrink down and let you see the. I'm sorry, I didn't have that one. I'll show you some others. Maybe I can find it afterwards. I'll show you flat. There's the outside of the synagogue. This is the one in Frankfurt. It's Westend Synagogue. Okay. And Inga, do you remember this? Westend Synagogue. Yeah, that's it. Freiherr-von-Steifstraße. Yeah, that's it. That's the one. Okay, so now let's go. Okay, yeah. Yeah. This one was spared because it was it somehow it got spared the bombings and so on. It was a storage facility during the war. You mean why it was spared? Interesting. And now let's get this. Rome. In Rome. Oh yeah. Well, I didn't get into the synagogue in Rome, but I got into the one in Florence. So this is the one in Florence. Huh? Look at it. It's fairly grand. Look at the ceiling. Let's see if it'll do the ceiling. Yeah. Here's the ceiling in the Florence Museum. You can see that. Okay, you can see that. Let's see. Okay, let's see if I can find you Amsterdam and Rome. All right, let's see if I can find this. Should be able to find it here in the. And then I've got one more. Well, I've got one more. I have to give you though. I know this one. I have to give you this one though. Before we go to Rome, anywhere else, we are here also. Okay. There you go, the main sanctuary. We're included in that. Yeah, it's a very dramatic structure, very dramatic structure. There we go. We don't use the sanctuary. If they're going to use it, then maybe they should use it to help. Okay, there we go. So see, I remember I helped make the arrangements for the filming in here. You know, it's special equipment to get this 3D effect, and you can go up and down. Right. Munich, the synagogue is behind walls. I think they were. Yeah. By the way, this one, if you want to know what maybe the temple looked like, the ancient temple, I think that the architects who designed the synagogue here, in doing this structure, copied intentionally images that were found or artist rendition of what the temple in Jerusalem may have looked like. And I think that that's the inspiration. We have the fountain is no longer there, unfortunately. This year for the Tashlich, we're going to have to get a bucket of water, put it by the door. All right, now let's go find. Here, I'm going to go find. Let me get out of this. How do I get out of this? Shrink it out. We have some magnificent. As soon as there's our chapel there. Let me see if I can get this. There we go. Yeah. Okay, synagogue search. So we're going to go to Amsterdam. We're going to play the hide and seek here. There we go. Country. Oh, they don't. Netherlands. Oh, they have to have the right word for it. and Amsterdam. Search. And now we have the Portuguese synagogue. And we have Gerard Dostrat Synagogue. So it's the oldest Ashkenazi. Which one are you talking about? The Sephardic synagogue or the Ashkenazic synagogue in Amsterdam? Sephardic. It's the Portuguese, yeah, 1675. There we go. Here we have it. Oh, the design? Interesting. You can see again here the chandeliers, the artwork, the benches. And here there's the artwork. Interesting, the seats, how are they arranged? Here's the Aron Kodesh. They're facing this way though. Yeah, this is interesting. Why are they facing? What are they facing here? What's on this side? It's not the Torah table, huh? Not the bima. Maybe, but maybe that's why. That's interesting. Amsterdam, Portuguese synagogue. I don't know. It's a good question. Some synagogues were designed facing Israel. Some were just designed. Very good question. I know. And also here, this synagogue never faced the east. Let's now look for Rome. And we'll finish with Rome. Italy. I'll go to Roma. What happened to Rome? Ancona, Florence, Italy won. They don't have Rome in here. In Poland? Well, that's the one that I showed you, the rooftop. There's one I showed. It was redecorated completely. They refurbished the original colors. Urbino, Verona. What happened to Roma? Let me see. Try Rome. He didn't get Rome. Yeah, but he couldn't get Rome. What's left? Italy, Turin, he has Turin, but not Rome. Yeah. Well, we have the Vatican. That's good enough. The guy wears a yarmulke. He has a tallis. What else do you want? The Catholic Church now wants to identify closer with the Jewish community. This we know. All right. So I hope you enjoyed it. A visit around the world, the synagogues around the world. That's what I wanted to give us a flair and a flavor for this. So what brings us together? Our shuls. The virus has played havoc with us. So a lot of synagogues have gone downhill. I mean, we've replaced it with online. It's not the same thing as getting out of your seat and coming into the synagogue. What can I tell you? It ain't the same thing. So, well, to everybody, wish you a good year. And to everybody, a good Shabbos. And we'll see you next week, next Shabbos. Bye-bye.